So the hardest part is going to be the making sure I get the right screen up. So is everyone seeing the title slide? All right, it worked. Okay, great. So hi, everybody, and nice to see some familiar faces, also to see some new faces. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about what I think is a new concept called organizational self-awareness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think it means, why you should care about it, and then what you can do to improve it if I've convinced you to care about it. I'd also like to make this as interactive as possible. So feel free to put comments or questions in the chat. Zoe's going to be monitoring that. I also gave her permission to interrupt me if there's a really good question. We'll always also have time at the end for Q&A. And there's also going to be plenty of time for small group discussions. So I want to make this as interactive as possible. So feel free to either put something in the chat, raise your hand, do something, because otherwise I'll just keep on talking. All right. So first definition. So so let me just first read it. Organizational self-awareness occurs when leaders and employees truly understand how their organization actually works rather than how they believe it works. So it's really, it's the ability of the organization to understand and know what they know and don't know about how they actually operate. So I don't know about you, but in my experience, most organizations I've worked in or consulting for, senior leadership is often unaware of what's really going on. For example, I've worked in consulting companies where the senior officers think that our compensation parameters and criteria is really clear, and none of us think it's clear. We think it's a black box. Or I worked at the Wharton School full-time for a number of years, and the dean was certain they had a diverse workforce. And when I was there, the only Black faculty member, and you can't make this up, taught a course on sports, of the business of sports. And my last year there full-time, which was 1997, was the year they granted tenure to the first woman ever in the Department of Management. So in my experience, senior leaders often have very little idea of what's really going on and what people are really thinking. So it's that they don't know what isn't working, what is broken, and often I think they don't know what is really broken. So let me ask, so is my experience unique, or have you experienced kind of a disconnect between what senior leaders believe and the reality on the ground? So unmute yourself, or have you experienced this too? Or I know I'm a little odd, but how odd am I? So anyone?
Well, Michael, you are odd, but beside the point, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That I've found that working in the very senior executive area at a very large financial services organization, they thought making $100,000 was nothing, and that and it just blew my mind about the financial arrangements, and the people who got the best benefits were the people who made the most money. Never mind the people who, there was a disconnect in thinking about how people lived, how people worked, how things got done, how fast things got done. There seemed to be a real breakdown.
Right. By the way, I still do coaching at Wharton. And if Wharton are the leaders of the future, at least some of them, I don't know if you're aware, but I think it was about a year ago, they did a survey and they asked the Wharton MBAs, what do you think the average person earns? And their average answer was $180,000. So how about anybody else? Do you find in your experience that senior leaders are often kind of out of touch with what is really going on in organizations and how people feel about the culture?
Yeah, Michael, I can give you an example of that. I just completed an employee engagement survey with a client, and it kind of blew the CEO's mind. He thought that employees were engaged. We found a high level of disengagement, and the primary reason was employees had no idea about the company direction, where we were going, what we were trying to do, which fortunately is a kind of an easy problem to fix, but it was a mind blower for the executive team.
So did the executive team thank you for that, or did they want to kill you? So
No, they are taking our recommendations to communicate company direction, company strategy, et cetera. So yeah, they're doing the right things.
okay, good. That's great. All right. So I want to move on to, so why care? So pardon me while I just read the slide. So in a study of over 22,000 companies, there was a publication in MIT Sloan Management Review, which does real research. Sorry, I was going to do a knock on Harvard Business Review, which is not based on real hard science statistics. They found that over 80% of companies that outperform their industry peers on total shareholder return by more than 20% lost all of their advantage in 5 years. And in fact, 5 years later, a lot of these leading companies underperform their peers. So what they found was that one of the key differences between the companies that sustained their competitive advantage and those that lost it was the company's ability to learn quickly and not get stuck in, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. So this is what they found. And I found this also, but in my experience, there's even a bigger problem. There's even a bigger problem than if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that is, I think companies often don't know what is broke, right? They have no idea what is broke because they aren't looking, or it's hidden, or something's going on, and they don't have any idea what's broken. So this, in my experience, this is the big problem, is that they often don't know what is broken, all right? So, for example, just like I think it was Mark that was saying, I once was hired by the COO of a big insurance company, and he wanted me to find out why his business heads were so unsuccessful in executing the company's strategy. So I did stakeholder interviews of the 4 business unit leaders. I won't go all into it, but one of the things I did was I asked each of them separately, on a scale of 1 to 10, how clear is your company strategy? So the average score was 4.5. The average, the highest was 6. So I reported this back to the COO. I said, so I didn't say this literally to him. You know, the good news is I found the problem, and the bad news is you. So, right? So that your business heads don't know the strategy. So he got furious. He leaned down and took out a stack, a PowerPoint deck of like 75 slides, slammed it on the table, and said, this is, you know, I gave them this, you know, they should know it. So I said, can I see it? So a couple of things. There was no executive summary. It was not a strategy. It was an operating guide. And the date was from 3 years ago. And 2 of the 4 people on the team joined the team less than a year and a half ago. So they had no idea what the strategy was, right? So he had no idea what the real problem was, right? He wanted me to fix them. So he had no idea. So let me give you a little bit of evidence, research to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so 1, the power and privilege of being a CEO can leave you insulated from information that might allow you to detect change. All right, we all know this, right? People at the top are often isolated. right? They don't know what's going on. Well, why? Well, other researchers found, and again, this is not going to be like new news to most of you, but leaders tend to shoot the messenger, right? So they don't know what's going on. They tend to shoot the messenger, all right? Managers are frequently stuck in their own ways. So they identify strongly with the status quo because they created it, and that they're fearful of listening to contrary views because they might have to change, right? I'm a change consultant, and we all laugh at when we're hired. They want the senior people that hire us want everybody else in the organization to change but themselves, right? So they're resistant to change, all right? So they have the illusion that nothing needs to be fixed because they don't hear any dissension in the organization. Well, if you keep on shooting the messengers, who's going to speak up, right? So they tend not to, they just think that if they don't hear any bad news, everything must be fine, right? And the number one reason employees don't speak up, so being shot as a messenger might be number two, is they don't believe the leaders want to hear what they have to say, right? So even if they speak up, no one's going to listen, nothing's going to change, right? And as a result, kind of the bottom line, so to speak, is that another MIT study of over 500 companies showed no correlation between the company's official values and their actual behaviors. Right? So that most people think that their value statements and what the senior leaders say is kind of a joke, and they get cynical about it. So let me stop here. Does this go with your experience? Any reactions or comments to what I've said so far in all this research?
Hi, this is Regina. I do think that this is very on point to what I experience in my organization.
Okay. And are the how aware are the leaders that they're unaware?
Well, that's a really good question. I think when they resist and they get angry, I think, or just unsettled by the news, I think it becomes very clear that they're not aware.
Right.
And that's the rub, because they think they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was in healthcare for a while back in the 80s, and I was I started as the manager of OD,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm putting this low and small because the only people below me were the assistants, the executive assistants, and HR reported to the CFO. When the CFO became CEO of Jefferson Hospital, he asked me to be his right-hand person. And I asked him why. And I won't give you all of what he said, but essentially he said, Michael, people trust you and you know what's going on in your organization. I have a lot of power. People are scared of me. People tell me what they think I want to hear. I've seen you work. You're going to tell me what I need to hear. So he was aware that he was unaware. Okay. So that is not typically what I find, but there are people out there that are aware and then use other people appropriately to help them stay informed so they're not so isolated. All right.
So I've seen it both ways.
Oh, Charlie? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Harry.
I'm sorry. Did you want to go Charlie first?
I defer to Harriet.
Thanks, Charlie. So I've seen it both ways. I left a Fortune 50 company 6 years ago. So I saw it with the vice president. We would have like 75 people in the room and they would ask any questions. And in the beginning, when he became the vice president, maybe 20 hands would go up. And then over the years, I watched as people started losing their jobs. It was the people whose hands were being raised. And eventually, after a couple years, he would say, any questions? And no hands would go up. And it was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And, the flip side, in August, I had lunch with a CEO, and I said to him, I said, you do know, because I knew him when he was a vice president and part of the global leadership team, and now he was promoted to CEO. I said, you do know now that you're CEO, people are not going to be able to honestly tell you what's going on. He goes, they're just not going to feel comfortable to tell you. He's like, I know that. So I think some people have this awareness and some people don't have this awareness.
Right. Yeah. Charlie?
Michael, we've known this for a while, I think. This is not new information, right? That this thing goes on. My question is, why haven't, like the people in the audience, been able to help change this? Why is this still something that people are holding on to and unwilling to let go of, this kind of thinking?
Yeah, well, we're going to get into that in a little bit, and I'm going to hear, but I mean, it's like the circle down here, if you keep on shooting the messenger, or in the company Harry was in it, people raise their hand, keep on disappearing, right? Like, you do not want to work for Elon Musk. If you say, I'm not so sure we're going in the right direction, you're gone, right? Now, he's an extreme, but that's what people's experience tells them, right? They see that people that speak up are problem, right? Charlie, you know me. So I've been a problem in every place I've worked because I keep on speaking up, and eventually they get rid of me, right? I mean, for example, at Wharton, bringing up, no, we're not that diverse, did not be in good stead with the dean at the time. I mean, if you just speak the truth, some leaders appreciate it and say, wow, I didn't know that, thank you. But in my experience, most leaders don't, all right? But for all the reasons that are up on this chart here, right? Yes, it's not a new problem. And we're going to go into some reasons why I think it's still a problem. So Charlie, I will, like you
Michael?
always do, you anticipate like 5 slides ahead of me. All right. All right, Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, an extreme example of what you're talking about is Vladimir Putin. And there was a very eye-opening article in the Journal the other day about how his inner circle has learned that the boss doesn't like bad news. So they've learned not to deliver him bad news, which has a lot to do with why the war in Ukraine is not going the way that Russia expected it to go.
Right. Well, I did some consulting at GE back in the days of Jack Welch, who, don't forget, at one point was considered the greatest leader of the past century. You did not want to cross Jack Welch. I once had a conversation with Jack Welch, and he did not like the question I asked him. So I was literally sitting next to him at lunch. So he picked up his chair and turned it away from me. The guy was just, he didn't want to mess with Jack Welch. All right. So what happens is, now, again, this is another oldie but goodie. I think most people here are probably familiar with the Joe Harry Winda. I've modified it a little bit to deal with organizational self-awareness. So let's start in the kind of the upper left here, the open area. That's where things are known by all the employees and known to the leaders. So this is an open area. This is great. This is where you want to be. This is where there's lots of organizational self-awareness. So, excuse me. So in this case, maybe the leaders of the organization believe that the organization values consistent innovation and lots of experimentation and learn quickly and learn from your mistakes. And the employees say, yeah, that's what it's like to work here. So that's an example of where what is known and believed by the leaders is known and believed by everyone else. Then you can have a blind spot, all right? Maybe in that same organization, the leaders feel that, oh, there's lots of experimentation you can learn. And the employees know, no, that's not true. If you make a mistake, you get blamed, you get in trouble, right? So that's a blind spot. Next is unknown, problems that no one is aware of. Now, for example, at one point, Yellow Cab was totally unaware of Uber, right? No one, until it was too late, right? There are problems that no one is aware of. They're just hidden. It's not because no one's looking. Well, maybe it is. Kind of no one's looking around the corners to see what's going on, right? And then finally, you have the hidden areas where it's something that is known by the leaders, but not the employees. The latest poster child from that is probably FTX, where the leaders knew that they were essentially had a Ponzi scheme, but the employees didn't know it. Right. So let me stop here. By the way, what we're going to focus on today is the blind spots and the unknown. But let me stop here. Any questions about this? Comments?
Well, I have a comment. I think that hidden area is almost always an indication that there's something unsavory going on. I don't think it ever has to my knowledge, there's ever a positive situation.
Right. Can you think of some examples?
Of unsavory behavior?
No, of the leaders hiding a problem from their employees.
Well, I mean,
Didn't want to put you on the spot
it's
here.
typical when companies are doing poorly. I mean, they just don't want that result known.
Right.
And jobs may be about to be lost, but they don't want to, they intentionally keep it from the staff because they don't want to have it impact productivity and have people start bailing before the leaders are ready to have them leave.
Right. Right. At least before they cash in all their stock options, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me pause here and ask any questions, reactions to what I've said so far. Is it making sense? Do I have a skewed view of the world? It kind of goes along with your experience. Any questions or reactions?
So hi, it's Stan Tilson. I was fortunate to work for companies that had more of a management by walking around kind of culture, where the senior leaders were encouraged to observe what was happening and connect with people and, eat lunch together, those sorts of things. And of course, in the COVID and now the Zoom culture, that MBWA is broken. So I'm curious to know how to create that environment you have to kind of schedule the interactions kind of way. And it's not quite the same as using Slack or Teams, but I suppose that's one way.
Yeah, and the other classic way is just doing surveys. In other words, you can do surveys, not necessarily Zoom polls, but you can do surveys. With one of my hats on that Carol went over, that's what we do. We do surveys. Okay, but I'm going to go over the pros and cons of surveys in a minute. But if you put people in small groups, even in breakout groups in Zoom, I think you're going to get more openness and honesty. And if you ask the right questions, okay. But it is probably a little bit tougher. But if you have, either small breakout groups or some kind of a town hall meeting, where the leaders really want questions, give good responses, act on. In other words, if someone raises an issue and the senior officers take action based on it, that's a virtuous cycle. People say, oh, they actually heard me and they're doing something about it. And then more and more you'll get questions, challenging questions from people in the organization. All right. Thank you, Stan. Any other questions, comments, reactions?
You know, Michael, I think anonymous questions are the only ones that actually work when you're in a large organization. Because too many people nowadays are incredibly fearful to speak up.
Okay, so well, I'll tell you the truth. So I'm in a big organization part of my time, and they did one of those surveys. 16 people called me up and said, Michael, do you think we can tell the truth in this survey? Are they going to find out who said what? Okay.
Just so you know, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do surveys, and having worked at that Fortune 50 organization that surveyed a lot, they changed the survey from anonymous to confidential, and 99% of the employees did not know what that meant. And what that meant was when the employee left the company, they would unblind and look at the responses.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, today, I assume most people believe there's no such thing as privacy. Right? And so people are skeptical about, well, they say it's anonymous, but they're gonna know where that poll came from. They're gonna know it came from my computer. So people are paranoid. And I think justifiably so.
You know, it makes me as Charlie said, this is not a new issue. The problem I see is that you're working with humans, right? And
at least for now.
At least for now we are. Yeah, we could be there. Robots and artificial intelligence is taking up more and more and more. They can even now beautifully write your college papers and things, I guess,
Right.
Whatever. But
yeah, at Wharton, it passed an MBA test.
Yeah. So the issue is, how do we change ourselves? And it's, you know, we can always look at leaders, the senior leaders of an organization, and say they, and there is a lot to go with they. But we also have to look at us. And so it's, how do we take this? Because I do think what you've said is absolutely valid and very, very true. But how do we, as human beings that have all the psychology and baggage and all these things, it's how do you get past it? Because there's this tendency. Knowledge is power. And many people share it, but we don't share it all. It's dealing with human nature. So
Right.
To me, that's part of the issue here.
Right. Well, I can tell you from my experience, when I hold up the mirror, so to speak, like this is what's going on, many senior leaders say, wow, thank you. I did not know that. Let's talk about what we can do. But a huge percentage, like that COO I talked to you about before, shoot the messenger, right? Like, and so, but we will get into some of the things you can do in a little bit, okay? So great. So what I'd like to do is next, so Zoe, can you put up the poll? So I wanted you to think about your current organization. I know some of you are consultants, so either your current organization or one you consult for. In general, how do you think the CEO is aware of what the employees really think? So vote early and often. All right. So look at that, the bell-shaped curve. So it's a little mixed, but obviously the most is in somewhat aware and a little aware. And that's the problem I'm talking about. Okay. It's kind of endemic. And so the question is, one, it's endemic, and two, at least the research I showed you and there's other research, but I'm not going to get into that here, that shows you organizational self-awareness has a real, true correlation with bottom line and with your competitive advantage. Okay. So thanks, folks. So let me turn off the poll here. All right, now. So next is I want to put you in breakout groups and discuss, so what are the causes of low organizational self-awareness? And you're going to be in groups of 4 or 5. Zoe's going to put you in breakout groups in a minute. Make sure you have someone who's kind of going to report back to the bigger group. But this is why I avoided some of the answers of what is the causes, because I want you to come up first. I'll give you my point of view in a couple minutes, but what do you think of the causes of low organizational self-awareness? All right. Zoe, are you ready to put people in?
Yes. About how long would you like?
I'd say 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. All right.
If people are not used to Zoom, which is hard to believe, you just hit join and you join the room.
Michael, would you like to be put into a room or you want to stay here?
No, I'd rather they just talk without my bias in there.
Great. I'm going to pause the recording for a moment while they're in the breakout rooms.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Well, does someone have? Okay, hopefully the echo went away. Thank you. So let's have some report outs. You may not remember if you were in room 1, but that was the one that Barbara Taylor was in. So who's the spokesperson for that group, or who's gonna?
I can speak to that, Michael. This
Great.
is Eric, and we did cover a lot of ground. We talked about a lot of this can be due to communication issues. It could also be due to the fact that organizations have a tendency to silo as organizations get larger. There's a lot of lack of cohesion because maybe business units just don't have to interact with each other very often. So that siloing can lead to a real issue. It can also be a differences of expectations. And again, kind of as organizations transition, whether because of size or markets or whatever, that transition process can cause, previous expectations to change, and therefore assumptions about, what the company's actually doing, what the company should be doing can be an issue. Another thing we talked about was just the humanness of it all. We're all human. As Barbara pointed out, 70% of the population is conflict averse, and nobody really wants to deal with conflict at a certain level. And so it can be difficult just to deal with the reality of things changing and being given difficult news about what's actually happening on the ground.
Great. Can you say another sentence or two about communication issues? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so sometimes the differences in whether there is a problem or not can actually be about a specific set of problems that somebody's not seeing, or it can be that we're just not talking about it in a way that we understand. So it may not be that leadership doesn't understand what's going on. It may be that leadership is not either hearing it correctly or is talking to everyone else about it, but they're not hearing it correctly because they're just not using a shared language, or they're not seeing everything the same way. Maybe the metrics that they're using to describe it just aren't the same, and so there's a lack of understanding of the picture that everybody's looking at.
Great, thanks a lot. All right, how about group 2? That was the group that Carol Mitchell was in.
Yeah, Michael, to build on what Eric said, part of the reason we came up with is that it's human nature to be positive. People want to be positive about the company and believe in the organization, so they don't really want to talk and bring up negative things. There's a lack of incentive, to be frank. Why should an employee be open and frank about things? How do I know that it doesn't put myself at risk, or how do I know anything's going to really happen? We also felt that leaders sometimes can be too outward facing, shareholders, media, and customers, and not looking at employees and sort of blindsided by things. Culture can be an issue. There could be a culture against speaking up. Somebody brought that up earlier about over time, everybody raised their hand in a group, sort of disappeared. And lastly, leaders lack empathy and lack self-awareness. They're not aware of their own drives, needs, and behaviors, and not aware of their own blind spots. So need an increase in empathy and self-awareness.
Great. All right. And how about the group 3? I think Charlie, I think you were in that one, but is there someone who can speak for that group?
Regina, would you offer a concise summary of what we talked about?
Sure. So some of those things came up, but a few that didn't come up is there might be a lack of trust from the leaders, especially if they're hearing it from someone who is not closest to them, because the thinking might be, well, I haven't heard that from my trusted advisors, so it must not be true.
Mm-hmm.
And it also requires behavior change. And sometimes people are just way too comfortable with what's been working and don't want to make the changes. And then some leaders may not care. They may not care what is actually happening.
Why wouldn't they care?
They're not paid for it. It's not in their compensation plan. They're not evaluated on culture. They have economic goals, et cetera, shareholder value for one. So why do I want to spend a lot of time on changing the culture when things are going great? Let me just keep the train on the track, will be okay.
Right.
And the average tenure of a CEO now, Michael's how long usually?
I think it's 18 months or less. I forget what it is.
So I just got to hang on to 18 months and then I'll get out of here with a great severance package, or I'll get promoted.
Right. Right. I'll move from, well, we're all of a certain age. So we will move from not making it to GE to going to Home Depot and destroying Home Depot, right? Nardelli tried to take what he knew at GE and apply it to an entirely different culture. He just didn't understand the culture, right? He almost destroyed Home Depot. All right. Anything else that's kind of missing here, you think?
Yeah, in group 4, we sort of jumped off Charlie's springboard there, talking about compensation systems where the leaders are compensated for meeting the numbers, and they're very focused on the numbers. They're not really focused on what's going on in the trenches. So that incentive structure can really drive them to be wearing blinders really about what's going on in the organization. And then the second one was sort of about culture, but it was around a culture where the mindset is one thing and the reality is another. So the example was that an organization that has a culture of we're brilliant. They are. They know they're brilliant. They know they're very smart. What they don't understand is that they need to change, and that changing and flexibility is not really part of the culture of the organization. And then they begin to look outside the organization to find an acquisition that will bring in that kind of flexible culture.
All right. Great. Yeah. There's, when you say reality, you can boil it down to often there's a disconnect between the rhetoric and the reality. And that's what's going on. All right. So all these are great reasons. Anybody want to add something that they just thought of? Yeah, Harriet?
Yeah, group 5. It was very
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You have a lot you're organizing there, Michael. It was very interesting because this is very common, and Georgine had mentioned it, that sometimes the CEO is new and the second in command, right, the second person is a researcher and really not concerned, or they're not really highly self-aware of their roles. And that happens a lot I know it happens a lot in pharma when people get promoted, up that ladder and they don't really have the skills. I think that research has shown that the majority of CEOs are actually introvert, right? And yet they have to do a role that a lot of times is very extroverted. Another thing that was mentioned was about the hubris of senior leaders and their inability to connect, and they really see the world through a filter. And then on the other side, sometimes they can't disclose what's going on and that they know there's a challenge, but they might be buying a new company or getting rid of a company or laying off employees for a specific reason. And this concept around fear is a really big thing about shooting the messenger. I said that the only way I survived in a Fortune 50 company so long was because my uncle had worked in one for probably 25 years and said very specifically to me, people will not remember the good you did. They will remember the dust you kicked up in doing it. And that really, it's a shame, because do you really want to teach people that if you want to survive in a challenging situation, this is the way to do it? Or do you want to have to teach them, like Barbara was saying, that you have to be a little bit more honest and how to communicate? It is a real challenge.
Right. Exactly. All right. So these are fantastic. These are great. So next I want to give you kind of a summary of my experience. So I think there's 4 leading causes. There's many more, but you got to reduce it to 3 or 4 to make it manageable. So the first 2, the lack of curiosity and courage among senior executives, I think we've kind of covered that. And also, especially number 2, the lack of psychological safety. I think most people know that. But what I found is there's 2 other major issues that I don't hear talked about a lot. And one is poor measuring methods, poor surveys. And the other is companies giving too much power to consultants, which may seem a little strange since I'm a consultant, but they give too much power to consultants. So let me go over these and then we'll talk again about what your experience is, what my experience is, and how they are similar or different. So here's some of my pet peeves with surveys. And lots of companies do surveys, okay? So everyone, I already said I was at Wharton full-time for a number of years. So the second dean I worked with, Wharton was always grouchy about the fact that they were never rated #1 MBA program, that it was Harvard or Stanford or something like that. They were really grouchy. So this is not a joke. I am not making this up. So the dean gets up in front of all the students and says, listen, if we become #1, your value in the marketplace goes up. Don't you want to earn more money? Don't you want to go to the best consulting firms? So we need to be #1. Now, the reason we're not #1 is we are very low in teacher evaluations. Everything else we're great at. Our teacher evaluations really are not very good. So let's see if we can become #1. So surprise, teacher evaluations went up and Wharton became #1 in the Business Week survey. It was a total joke, right? Because I think someone before said we want to be positive and stuff like that, right? A lot of people say, oh, I work at the one of the best companies to work at. When I do consulting for them and talk to the people, they go, yeah, give me a break. We are not a great company to work for, right? But people know that if they vote, first they're scared of the confidentiality of the survey. And two, they know if they're number one, then it's easier to recruit people, their pay goes up, blah, blah, blah. So, that's a typical survey issue. Anyone else have that experience too?
Yeah, Michael, one of the things that we learned from a client who became certified as the best place to work was that they really had to pay big time to play in that game.
Correct.
So that makes you really question what the employees were actually saying.
Again, we're all of a certain age. Remember the Baldrige Award? And people would break their culture to win the Baldrige Award. It was like it took days and days of work to fill out the forms. All right. So that's one problem. Two, here's an example. Amazon. A recent employee survey at Amazon said that 95% of their employees will recommend as a place to work. I mean, I look at that and you go, you got to be kidding. You got to be kidding, right? You could probably say the same thing at Starbucks. The baristas are not happy there, right? And so to me, it's the old garbage in, garbage out, right? And I think the surveys are set up to be positive, right? They only ask certain questions. They only ask the questions they think will be answered positively. And it's like why some people hire consultants. They hire the consultants to confirm what they already want to do, right? Microsoft suddenly had an epiphany. All right. This is from an article. It often took months. This is on what they found out about their own engagement survey. It took months to digest it. And they found that the scores really didn't indicate what was going on, right? Right. So they've changed their entire approach to measuring engagement. Okay. Again, most of these engagement surveys ask the wrong questions, in my opinion. Again, take a long time to digest. They aren't actionable. I mean, for a long time I've found the old Gallup stuff, have a best friend at work kind of stuff. I mean, really, how do you act on that? What do you do? It just boggles my mind. All right. And then one of my bigger pet peeves is benchmarking. Most surveys benchmarking. Okay. So how do you gain self-awareness by comparing yourself to everybody else? No, you got to look in yourself, right? How do you gain self-awareness? By looking what hundreds or thousands of other companies do and compare yourself to average. You want to compare yourself to average? Well, the average company has absolutely no organizational self-awareness. I mean, what are you comparing yourselves to? All right. How do you compare yourselves to companies that have very different cultures, very different strategies, very different structures, very different everything? So what happens is companies say, oh, let's do what they do. McKinsey says this is the answer. Let's do that. How do you get self-awareness out of that? How do you get self-awareness out of doing like a generic diversity program? All right. Do you wonder why over 70% of change initiatives fail? Because one reason is because you're benchmarking. You're just repeating what I think is mediocre answers for somebody else. Actually, there's an article who did it. I think it was Bain 3 years ago. And they said, what are the most popular tools you use? Benchmarking was in the top 3 or 5. How satisfied are you with these tools? Benchmarking came out at the bottom. So everybody does it. No one likes it. But everybody does it, so let's do it. It's crazy. Then you wonder why people don't have organizational self-awareness, but you're just doing what everybody else does. So part of the problem is that people go for simple answers, right? Because finding out the root cause of things is really hard. You got to know what you're asking. You got to really want to know. So what happens is a lot of companies look at symptoms. We only have 35% engagement. Well, why? What's going on? So they deal with symptoms, low morale or whatever. They don't go to the root cause. So senior exam officers want, and pardon me, HR, they want simple answers. I mean, I don't know. I'll get into a little danger here, politics. We have too much crime. Well, put more people in jail. Get more guns. That's simple. God forbid you actually deal with the root cause, right? That's tough work. It's complex. There's no simple answer. Okay? So I've gone on a little bit of a rant here about engagement surveys and benchmarking. So what is your experience with engagement surveys and other culture surveys? Do they really get to the root cause? Are they helpful or not? So let me hear what you got to say.
Michael, I know in a couple of organizations that I've seen some of these surveys done, the interesting part was the first time that they were done, or the first time that they've been done in a long time, they were effective at kind of healing some, communication issues. But the problem is whether those results were actually acted on, or whether those results were actually resulted in change that people felt, made a big difference, to the point where if they didn't feel that there was any action, future surveys actually complicated the problem.
Correct. And then that is my experience both with surveys and back when I was at Jefferson. Everyone's in the Philadelphia area, so everyone, I assume, knows Jefferson. So when I was right hand of the CEO, once a month, I would meet with 20 people. Well, 20 people were invited, and they were randomly selected, actually by Social Security number, which probably is illegal today to do that. But they would randomly select people by their Social Security number. And in the beginning, I'd say, hey, what do we need to know? One or two people that knew me might speak up. But by the fourth month, when people realized that I did not reveal confidential information, I didn't identify who said what, and that I actually went to the CEO and said, we need to change this. They could actually see changes. By the fourth and fifth month, all 20 people invited would show up, and most people would participate. And even by the 6 months it was, Jefferson was heavily union. There were Teamsters in there complaining about their union. I mean, people, it took a while, but people started talking about what they were really feeling and what they really wanted to change. But it took 6 or so months before people felt really comfortable with me. Okay? And so that I didn't reveal confidences and got action. It was obviously very helpful that I was right hand of the CEO, but that's what made the difference. Okay? Anybody else, your experience with engagement surveys or culture surveys? Because I've kind of really dumped on them.
Now, you're right. I mean, you're 100% right. Zoe, unfortunately, is recording this. So I have to say, hypothetically, you are 1,000% correct, because I was the one responsible for the big, a lot of the getting on the list. And I've seen outside companies used for surveying, and they didn't like the results. And so they made them change the results, hypothetically, for anyone reviewing this recording. So, and then eventually they kept pushing back on the vendor who was doing the surveys, and the vendor, broke the contract because they said they wouldn't continue to, basically skew the results in the way the company wanted the results.
Right.
a lot of these organizations, they very much know. I mean, what HR organization in the world now doesn't know that you should be doing blind interviewing of employees? And yet whenever I ask a company, so are you doing the blind interviewing? You know, DEI is quite an important topic the last few years. And they're like, no. And I'm like,
Right.
They know, they're just not doing it.
Yeah. Again, some of my stories are old, but so people know JD Powers. They haven't been that active, right? All these customer service and everything awards. Well, JD Powers started out as a department at GM. And GM, so as they gave the results, and the results went up the chain in GE and at GM, the results got more and more positive as it went up. And so JD Power said, we got to be independent because you're not getting accurate information. So that's when they became an independent company, because as an internal resource, everyone was kind of whitewashing the data as it went up. And so even if the CEO at the time wanted to hear the truth, they weren't getting the truth.
I mean,
I have problems with, oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say the CEOs have access to the aggregate data from like their health insurance. They can see how many of their employees are on antidepressants. They can see, I mean, there's so much data available to them. It's whether or not they're choosing to really want to affect change. Correct. I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
No. I have problems with surveys because it's like when you go to a leadership program and you learn new skills and you have it in these little models that you're supposed to follow, and you learn them in the workshop or seminar, whatever it is, and then you put the workbook on the shelf and you don't do anything with it. So what I find with surveys is, okay, you may hear information, you may trust it or not trust it, that's another issue, but then what do you do with it? And most of the time I find that what companies do to take that information and do something with it is mind-boggling. Either they don't do anything at all with it, so again, employees figure, why should I even bother, because nothing really is done, or that instead of looking at systemic overall issues and getting to the root, as you would say, Michael, they tell each department manager to focus on very specific little things. It's kind of like moving the chairs on the Titanic, whatever right. that thing is. It's not really doing anything. So I think at this point in time, I think that there is a real feeling from most people about surveys is, I'll fill it out. Doesn't really, I'm not going to put much thought into it. It doesn't really matter, and what's going to be done. And so I think it is a tool that has passed for many organizations its usefulness.
Yeah, and often the results are really, there's too much data, it's too complex. You know, a senior leader doesn't want to deal with it, even if they wanted to, it's just too much. So what I found is really helpful is that you measure the complexity, but you give them a map of here's how all the different parts of your culture interact with each other. And here are one or two levers that you can do to get started, because people don't know what to change or where to start. And so you have to make it simple enough so that they can see, what do I change, where do I start, and how do I know it's working or not, right? So let me get to another point I want to make before, okay. Giving too much power to consulting firms. So, I'm going to go back to benchmarking a little bit. Consulting firms like benchmarking, not only because it's simple, but they also know what the benchmarking survey says, so they know that it's always going to come down to the same 4 or 5 solutions, right? Because if you're benchmarking, it's always going to say, do one of these 5 things. You need a workshop on this, or whatever. So they make sure that after the survey, they know what it's going to say and what the benchmark is going to say. Then they funnel you into one of their solutions they already have on the shelf, and that's where they make their money. Okay, not on the survey, but on all the follow-up stuff they do. So I once competed with McKinsey. And I'll just say it was at Lenovo. Okay, Lenovo was, this was, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, had kind of Apple envy. You know, why can't we be more like Apple? And I was giving them a customized approach, and McKinsey, they saw, was not. So McKinsey, when they found out that they were going to go with me, they offered the diagnostic for free. Why would they do that? Because the money was not in the diagnostic, was on selling them all these canned solutions afterwards. You can see I'm a little bit of a cynic, but it's based on many years of experience. All right. And clients get enamored by the brand name. Oh, McKinsey's saying it. Whoa, Bain is saying it. Whoa. Okay. So what these companies want to do and push back, I'm a big cynic, is they want to make you dependent on them. Right? I can't believe how many times I work with clients where they're trying to decide whether to centralize or decentralize. So McKinsey says decentralize. Then 3 years later, after it doesn't work, McKinsey says, oh, you ought to centralize. Then they go back and they make $10 million each time they tell you to go in the opposite direction. They are making you dependent on them because they never teach you. They send in all these Wharton MBAs, right? The kids I coach, who I wouldn't trust to lead pretty much anything. They are, swarming into these companies, doing, take over your company, do all this analysis, and it's unnecessary. Okay. They want you to be dependent upon them. And what I think all you need is someone to help you hold up a mirror and say, this is what's going on. This is what's working. This is what's not. If I were you, you might want to do this. And what I do is say, then, I say I don't do the follow-up because I don't want to be accused of feeding myself. Okay? Now, luckily for me, some clients say, we're going to use you anyway, but I give them the choice of not using me. All right. So you need to, instead of doing everything for them, you need to empower them. So you give them the skills to measure themselves and make the changes in the future. So we're not going to have time for another breakout group, but so what do you think you can do to increase organizational self-awareness, either in your own organization or in one of your clients? So what do you think? What I'll do is, so hold on here. So speak up. What do you think you can do to increase organizational self-awareness in your organization or a client's organization? Just unmute yourself and speak up.
Michael?
Yeah.
Research indicates that when companies buy professional services, they value the education the professional service provider provides very highly. So my suggestion would be educate them on what we're talking about. What's the research say best practices are? Not in a you should do this or you should do that, but just educate them. So that education begins to build and the conversations begin to start around the information that you provided to people on the inside of that particular company. Okay. Find out who is inclined, is an early adopter of the idea, and they're the people you go after to begin to spread the virus of good thinking.
Great. All right. Yeah, start with get a small success and then build on that and then scale it up. Absolutely. Other ideas?
I don't know whether it's an idea, but I mean, I'm an optimist, right? And I think there's a big change in generations coming. The majority of the leaders are no longer going to be baby boomers, and I think as you go and have new leaders that are coming from they've been raised differently, family matters to them. I mean, it's not all about working 24/7 for some people. I think that's going to, in some ways that will start changing or maybe moving the needle.
Harriet, to add to that, I think our younger leaders also want feedback. They really demand feedback. Whereas some of our different generations didn't really think it was value added.
Great.
I'm also going to say that to change this, people need to realize this is not a quick change. As you would say, Michael, it's not a simple one thing is a silver bullet that's going to make the change. I think that leaders and employees need to be thinking long-term, taking the small steps and building upon them and realizing it's going to take a while. There's no simple solution, and it's going to probably be multiple things that have to be done, not just one.
In a bit of shameless self-promotion, some of the clients we've worked with our survey have seen changes in 6 months, measurable changes. Okay, because you're not saying, oh my God, you're saying work on this, right? And it's research-based. So I think if you pick on the right lever to change, you can get pretty quick results. All right, anything else?
Well, I, for one, am a little bit skeptical about this change in generations concept. I'm not certain that human nature isn't such that people who may be younger and currently have slightly different values won't get absorbed into the same consciousness as their elder leaders today.
All of us boomers, that's what happened.
Right.
Right. Well, we'll see. It might be different. Also,
it would be good. It would be good.
Yeah, and who knows the impact of AI and everything. Actually, if you look in the chat, Charlie asked Chat GPT the question about organizational self-awareness. It is scary. It probably scanned the same research that I did. So it came up with actually a lot of the stuff that I said. The good news is it didn't contradict me, but it is, it is going to be scary about how good this stuff is. And, what is the next generation going to do for work? That's going to be interesting, because this technology change is going to replace white collar people, whereas previous technology replaced blue collar people. All right. So I'm mindful of the change. So here's some of what I suggest for overcoming low organizational self-awareness. So remember, I had 4 causes. So if it's a lack of curiosity and courage among senior executives, and there's tons of research to back that up. Show them that revealing the truth will help their strategy execution, because that's usually what they care about. It's like that CEO of that insurance company. Why aren't my business leaders executing their strategy? Well, in this case, they had no idea what the strategy was. So he got rid of me. But, you can show them, right? There's evidence. Try a little experiment. Show how it works. A lack of psychological safety. That's a major, major issue. All right. We already talked about that. All right. If you keep confidences, people believe it, and they see action being taken in the next round, engagement will go up. Engagement in the survey will go up. People will be more open. They'll be more honest. Like they were at Jefferson when I was doing face-to-face kind of work. For measurement, All right. Collect data that gets to the root causes. That takes a little bit of thought, takes a little bit of experimentation. The survey that I use has taken 25 years to develop, of trial and error. It's not easy. And if you can, avoid benchmarking. All right. Companies give too much power to consultants. All right. Make sure consultants use data to support your implementation of the change. Okay. It doesn't necessarily take rocket science and a 5-day program to know what to do with some of these things. If people don't feel they know what they're getting rewarded for, which is like really high on what we find in our surveys, the solution is simple. If you make it behaviorally anchored questions, the survey answers and tells you what to do, right? If rewards aren't clear and that causes low morale and checking out, then make your rewards clear. It's not rocket science. Okay. So, anyway, you want to hopefully, hold up the mirror to reveal their blind spots, and hopefully they say thank you. We've had lots of executives go, thank you very much. And then hopefully your survey can reveal problems they don't know about. The shock on their faces when we show them the data and they go, oh my God, we had no idea. That's why we've been messing up. It's really powerful stuff. Okay. So, folks, I want to thank you for your attention and engagement. We have a couple more minutes now if people want to stay on for questions, comments. I'd be more than happy to talk about this for the next day and a half. All right. So, and if you're interested in, learning more about how, the surveys and stuff that I use, send me an email or something like that. That's fine. If you don't know how to get in touch with me, Barbara does, Charlie does, Carol does, a whole bunch of people here know how to get in touch with me. All right. So thank you. Any questions?
Charlie has one.
Now he's just waving at me. Yeah. Yeah, John.
Michael, we very much appreciate you sharing your experience, wisdom, and research. My question is, what can we do to help you, Michael? Because you're still working, dude. You're not retired. So tell us, what can we do to help you?
Thank you, Charlie. I forgot that's your go-to question. Thank you. If you know of any companies that would like to have a talk with me and explore whether, I could be helpful to them, that'd be great.
See, I think you'd make a great strategic partner for everybody on this call that consults with companies. You're somebody that's in their network that they can bring in. You can just remember you said to me a long time ago, I can get Ram Shriram to show up. Remember you told me that? Because you have a relationship with them. Everybody here has a relationship with you, and you're the kind of person, when we bring you into a client, our status goes up immediately because of all the experience you have and the types of people with whom you hang out with. So that's my point, that this group should take advantage of you.
Yeah.
In a positive way, for mutual benefit, of course.
Right. Any other questions or comments? All right. It's really strange. When I talk to people about organizational self-awareness, they go, oh yeah, that's obvious. Well, what have you done to change it? Well, that's a little tough, right? So, if you want, I can, give you some advice for free, right? About what you might be able to do. Okay. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, Charlie.
One final thing that just came to my mind. With the artificial intelligence and everything, our job is to figure out what can AI get to that we know about that we can share with our clients to make a difference for them. We need to make our clients smarter because they need to make decisions to impact their company and their employees and their clients. So we have to figure out, what do we know, or what information can we share to make a difference? Or like in Michael's case, Michael Brenner, he uses music as a vehicle to get people to understand concepts in a different kind of a way. Now, I know that Bain and Mercer don't do that. So he's got an inside edge to differentiate his approach from other approaches. So I think that's a very important lesson that I learned today from you, Michael. Thank you.
And don't forget, AI is just a very sophisticated, smart benchmarking. So ultimately, hopefully, at least in the next 5 years, ultimately, a human being should make the final decision. So if my doctor puts in my symptoms to AI and it says, tell Michael to take this medication, I want the doctor to say, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a good idea because I know you, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, hopefully, before I retire, after I retire, I don't envy my grandchildren what the world, but ultimately, a human being is still at the end the person who should make the final decision.
Yeah, that's true.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.